Let's talk about it with Naveed Jamali. He's a reserve intelligence officer with the Office of Naval Intelligence and a senior fellow in the Program on National Security at the Foreign Policy Research Institute. Also has a great deal of familiarity with Russian espionage and how it operates. Naveed, thanks for being with us today.
Great to be here, Scott. John.
So you suggest that the administration has been a little, well, they've sent conflicting messages about how to handle or about how to deal with Russia. What do you mean?
Well, I think it's a great question, and I think I'm heartened by what Ambassador Haley said. I think what we're finally seeing is a pivot here. Clearly, the president ran a campaign of making ISIS, the defeat of ISIS, a cornerstone of his administration, and I think he was very clear in saying that he might consider Russia as a partner for that battle. And I think now that he's in the White House and he's surrounded himself with good people like General Kelly and General Mattis and Mr. Pompeo and Mr. Tilford, I think what we're seeing now is perhaps a realization that Russia is really not a friend of ours, and perhaps even their capability in helping us in that battle really isn't there. So I think it's a really welcoming pivot we're seeing.
So what did they do in this last election, and what was their intention?
Yeah, that's a very good question, and I think the word hacking, we have to be very careful here. What the Russians did is essentially steal data. Now, in intelligence parlance, that's collection. Look, that is what intelligence agencies do. They have a file on world leaders, and in fact, I often joke that when I'm on TV, there's probably some Russian, enlisted kid who's writing about what I'm saying. It's just something that they do. The change here, John, was not so much the collection, but rather the releasing it to WikiLeaks, I think, is the troubling part. Now, I don't actually believe that their intent was to get Mr. Trump, now President Trump, elected, but rather I think it was, frankly, just to embarrass us. And I think it's not so much the hacking, but rather that release of information, which is really troubling, and the connection with Julian Assange, which is doubly troubling. So I think we have to look at that connection.
Assange said the Russians were not the source of the information that WikiLeaks received. You discount that?
Absolutely. And, again, I think just to underscore this, there's absolutely no evidence that the numerical value, the actual voting, was tampered. So thankfully, the Russians did not hack what is now a critical infrastructure, our election system. So voters should have confidence that at least the physical vote numbers were not changed. But yeah, I do. I think someone who's holed up in an embassy in London, I don't think we should give much credibility to.
In some respects, some of the antiquated voting systems that this country still uses are the toughest to hack. I mean, you wheel one of those big old-fashioned voting machines into a county precinct somewhere, and people punch cards with it. Pretty hard to hack into that from Moscow.
Yeah, it's a good visual. Yeah, no, I agree with you. And look, I think that when you have technology that's better for buying groceries with a chip in your credit card, there is something that can be done here with voting. And I think again, it comes down to Americans having confidence in this sacred thing that we do. And there's no reason not to use technology, especially after this. Whether the Russians, even though they didn't hack in this, it's clear that going forward, people may want to do that, and there's no reason that we should invest in protecting this infrastructure so that Americans can have confidence in that their vote actually counts.
There have been questions about how tough the Trump administration would be on Russia. Given those questions, are you surprised or at least heartened about what Nikki Haley had to say at the UN?
I am certainly, I'm happy to hear that. I think it is a welcome pivot, and look, it is so important that the U.S. Both remains credible and as a sort of a guiding force here. And I think, look, the Ukrainians came out and said, we're worried America's not backing us, and as a result, we're going to start ratcheting up the violence. And that's not a benefit to anyone here. I think a peaceful solution is in everyone's best interest. And having the U.S. come out and say to Russia, hey, this is not going to stand, I think sends a very clear message. And I want to think that the Russians misjudged this president, and I think that is boy, you can't get a clearer message than that.
A lot of people misjudged this president. Naveed Jamali, thank you.